I noticed Everett the second he stepped into the cafe. Not because he was loud. He wasn't. Actually, it was the opposite. Most people walked in to rush being half asleep, glued to their phones, barking complicated coffee orders without looking up. Everett walked in like he was carrying the weight of the entire week on his shoulders and trying not to let it show. Dark hoodie. Work boots. Tired eyes. And somehow, despite looking exhausted, he still managed to look unfairly good. "Large black coffee," he said when he reached the counter. His voice was rough, like he hadn't talked much that day. "Long day?" I asked automatically while punching in the order. He gave me a quick glance. Just a glance. But something about it lingered. "You could say that." Then his eyes flicked toward the handwritten sign hanging crooked near the pastry display. "Employee only area, please ignore the exposed wires. We're fixing it." Probably. His mouth twitched for the first time. "That sign's terrifying, by the way. Management says humor reduces lawsuits. Pretty sure that's not legally true." I laughed before I could stop myself. And that was the first mistake. Because after that, I started noticing him. He came in 3 mornings that week. Always before 8. Always looking like he'd slept 4 hours maximum. Same black coffee. Same quiet energy. And every single time, he looked at me like he recognized me from somewhere. Not in a confused way. In a way that made my chest tight. Like he knew something. "You work nearby?" I asked on Friday morning while handing him his coffee. He nodded once. "Electrician. We're renovating the bookstore 2 buildings down." That explained the boots. And the tool belt hanging low on his hip. And, unfortunately for me, why my brain completely stopped functioning for half a second. "Cool," I managed. "Smooth." He took the coffee, fingers brushing mine for maybe half a second too long. Then he looked at me again. Really looked at me. And there it was. That expression. Like he understood something I hadn't said out loud. "You always flirt this awkwardly with customers?" he asked. I almost dropped the lid container. "I'm not flirting." "You sure?" His voice stayed calm, but there was amusement underneath it now. I felt heat climb straight into my face. "You're very confident for someone drinking plain black coffee voluntarily." He laughed quietly at that. Low and warm. "See you Monday, Dylan." Then he walked out. And I stood there staring after him like an idiot because I had absolutely never told him my name. The realization hit 3 seconds later when my coworker Mia snorted behind me. "Your name tag genius." Right. Obviously. Still, the way Everett had said my name sat with me the entire weekend. Like he liked how it sounded. Monday morning, the power went out halfway through my shift. Complete blackout. 1 second the espresso machine was screaming, the next the cafe dropped into silence except for confused customers and Mia swearing near the register. "Fantastic," my manager groaned. "Just fantastic." 10 minutes later, Everett walked in carrying a toolbox. And somehow he looked even better covered in dust and irritation. "That you're doing?" I asked. He raised an eyebrow. "You think I personally attacked the electrical system just to see you?" I paused. "Maybe?" That got another laugh out of him. God, I was in trouble. He crouched behind the counter near the breaker panel, while my manager hovered anxiously nearby asking questions every 30 seconds. I tried not to stare. I failed completely. Everett worked quietly, sleeves pushed up, focused in that intense way people get when they're good at something with their hands. Every now and then he'd glance up toward me, catching me looking almost every time. And every single time, that same look appeared again. Like he knew. Finally, after my manager got distracted by an angry customer, Everett looked up at me from the floor. "You gonna keep staring or are you planning to help? I don't know anything about electricity." "You don't need to." His eyes held mine for a second longer than necessary. "Just hand me things when I ask." Something about the way he said it made my stomach flip. So I crouched beside him. Close enough to smell cedar dust and coffee on his hoodie. Close enough to notice the tiny scar near his jaw. close enough that I became painfully aware of every movement he made. "Flashlight," he said. I handed it over. "Our manager still thinks you caused this on purpose," I whispered. "Maybe I did." I looked at him. He was already looking at me. Then he smiled slightly and added, "Would have been easier to just ask for your number, though." My brain fully stopped working after that. I actually stared at him in silence long enough for him to grin. "That bad, huh? You can't say things like that while holding exposed wires." "Why?" "Because if I die right now, it'll be embarrassing." That laugh again. Soft. Real. Everett shook his head and went back to work, but I caught the small smile that stayed on his face afterward. And for the first time in months, maybe longer, I felt something warm settle in my chest. Not panic. Not confusion. Just possibility. Which should have felt nice. Instead, it terrified me. I avoided Everett for the rest of that shift. Not intentionally. Okay, maybe a little intentionally. Every time he looked at me, I suddenly became extremely busy doing absolutely nothing important. Restocking lids. Rearranging straws. Wiping already clean counters like my life depended on it. Mia noticed immediately. "Oh my God!" she whispered while pretending to clean the espresso machine. "You like him?" "I do not. He literally flirted with you while fixing electrical wiring." "He flirts with everyone." She stared at me. "Dylan, that man looks at you like he's already halfway through a love confession." I nearly choked on my own coffee. Before I could answer, Everett stood up from behind the counter, brushing dust off his jeans. "Power should hold now," he told my manager. Then his eyes shifted toward me again. "There's still one thing that needs checking, though." I hated how quickly my pulse reacted to that. My manager sighed dramatically. "What now?" Everett kept looking directly at me when he answered. "Back storage outlet." Mia made the most obnoxious fake cough I'd ever heard in my life. "Dylan can show you." Traitor. The back storage room was tiny. Way too tiny. I realized that immediately when Everett stepped inside behind me and the door swung halfway shut. Boxes stacked everywhere. Cleaning supplies. Extra syrup bottles. And Everett. Close. Too close. He crouched near the outlet while I leaned against a shelf trying to act like my heart wasn't behaving insanely. "You always this nervous around electricians?" he asked without looking up. "I'm not nervous. You reorganized the same napkin stack 4 times. That feels exaggerated." He glanced up then. "Nope." I laughed despite myself, and the tension loosened a little. A quiet settled between us after that. Not awkward exactly. Just careful. Everett tested the outlet, then sat back against the wall with a small sigh. "All good." Neither of us moved. I should have said something normal. Instead, I asked, "So do you flirt with every barista you meet?" His expression changed slightly at that. Softer. "No." The answer came too fast to be fake. My stomach flipped again. "Oh." Everett rested his forearms on his knees, watching me steadily now. "You want to know something weird?" "Probably not, but go ahead." "The first day I came in here," he said quietly, "I thought you were straight." I blinked. "That's offensive." That made him laugh. "I'm serious," he said. "Then you smiled at me and I realized you were trying way too hard not to look at me." I looked away immediately. "See?" he said. "Okay, maybe you're annoyingly observant." His expression stayed calm, but his voice lowered slightly. "You looked at me the same way." That hit harder than it should have. Because he was right. From the beginning, there'd been something between us. Something neither of us had fully touched yet. And Everett seemed completely unafraid of it. That was the dangerous part. "I don't really do," I started. Then stopped. "Do what?" I shrugged helplessly. "Whatever this is." He studied me for a second. "You mean flirting?" "I mean people looking at me like they already figured me out." For the first time since meeting him, Everett's smile faded completely. Not cold. Just understanding. Too understanding. That happened before? He asked quietly. I immediately regretted saying anything. Forget it. Dylan. The way he said my name made it impossible to ignore him. I crossed my arms. It's not a big deal. That usually means it was. I let out a breath and stared at the floor. There was this guy last year, I admitted. At work. He kept making jokes. Comments. Nothing direct enough to report. I swallowed. But he looked at me like he knew. Like he was waiting for me to confirm it. Everett went very still. And? He asked carefully. And I hated it. Silence. Then Everett stood slowly. Not crowding me. Not touching me. Just close enough that I could feel the warmth coming off him. When I look at you, he said quietly, I'm not trying to corner you. I looked up at him. His expression had softened completely now. I look at you like that because I think you're beautiful, he continued. And because I think you already know exactly who you are. The room suddenly felt way too small. Nobody had ever said something like that to me so directly before. Not without pressure attached. Not without expectations. Everett just stood there calmly, like he was handing me the truth and letting me decide what to do with it. You say intense things very casually, I muttered. That small smile came back. Occupational hazard. You're an electrician. Exactly. I laughed again, quieter this time. And before I could overthink it, Everett reached into his hoodie pocket, pulled out a folded receipt, and handed it to me. A phone number. That's there if you want it, he said simply. No pressure. Then he opened the storage room door. And just before stepping out, he glanced back at me one more time. That look again. Like he understood me already. Only now it didn't scare me quite as much. I didn't text Everett that night. Or the next one. Not because I didn't want to. The problem was that I wanted to way too much. His number sat folded in my wallet like it had its own gravitational pull. Every few hours I'd catch myself thinking about the way he looked at me in the storage room. Calm. Certain. Like he wasn't embarrassed by what he wanted. I didn't know how to deal with that. Most of my life had been built around avoiding attention. Not because my family was terrible, or because something dramatic happened when I was younger. It was simpler than that. People noticed things. Small things. The way I talked. The way I looked at certain guys for half a second too long. So I learned how to edit myself early. Nothing obvious. Nothing dangerous. Nothing anyone could point at directly. And then Everett walked into my life looking at me like there was nothing shameful to hide in the first place. It made me feel exposed in the best and worst way possible. By Thursday, Mia was losing patience with me. You still haven't texted him? I kept wiping the counter aggressively. I'm thinking about it. You've been thinking about it for 4 days. I like considering my options. You reorganized the sugar packets alphabetically yesterday. That was stress productivity. She pointed at me dramatically. Exactly. The cafe door opened before I could defend myself further. And of course it was Everett. Like the universe enjoyed humiliating me personally. He stepped inside wearing another dark hoodie, work gloves shoved into one pocket, hair slightly damp from the rain outside. His eyes found me immediately. And just like every other time, that stupid warmth spread through my chest before I could stop it. Hey, he said casually as he approached the counter. Hey. Mia looked between us with the excitement of someone watching reality TV unfold live. Everett glanced at her name tag. Mia, right? Oh, I absolutely love you already, she informed him. I covered my face briefly. Everett laughed quietly. That bad? She's been miserable all week because she refuses to text you. Mia. Too late. Everett looked back at me slowly, amusement growing in his expression. You didn't text me? I was going to. When? Eventually. That's a very threatening timeline. I hated how easy it felt talking to him. Like we'd skipped several stages somehow. He leaned lightly against the counter. Good news then. What? You don't have to text me now. I frowned slightly. Because I'm asking you to dinner instead. My brain genuinely short-circuited. Mia made a sound like she just witnessed a marriage proposal. Everett ignored her completely, still watching me. No pressure, he added calmly. You can say no. The thing was, I knew that. That's what made it impossible to dismiss him as another guy messing around. Everett never pushed. He just stood there honestly, giving me room to choose. When? I heard myself ask. His smile appeared slowly. Tomorrow? I should have said maybe. Instead. Okay. Mia almost screamed. Everett looked unfairly pleased with himself after that. Okay, he repeated softly, like he enjoyed hearing it. Then he ordered his usual coffee like he hadn't just altered my entire emotional stability. The rest of my shift passed in a blur. By the time Friday evening arrived, I'd changed outfits 5 times and considered canceling at least 12. I wasn't good at dates. Correction, I had almost no experience with dates involving men at all. There had been almosts. Lingering looks. Late-night conversations. One confusing situation in college that ended before it became real. But nothing like this. Nothing where someone openly wanted me. Everett texted exactly 20 minutes before we were supposed to meet. Outside whenever you're ready. Simple. No games. When I stepped outside my apartment building, he was leaning against his truck looking up at the evening sky. And for a second I just stopped walking. Because outside the cafe, outside work dust and fluorescent lighting, Everett looked different. Softer somehow. Still broad-shouldered and intimidatingly attractive, unfortunately for me, but calmer too. His face brightened slightly when he saw me. Hey! Hey! His eyes moved over me briefly, not in a creepy way. More like appreciation he wasn't trying to hide. You look nervous, he said gently. I am nervous. Good. He opened the passenger door for me. Means I'm not suffering alone. That made me laugh enough to breathe normally again. Dinner was at a small diner outside downtown. Quiet. Warm lighting. Mostly empty. Easy. I realized halfway through the meal that Everett had chosen this place intentionally. No pressure. No crowd. No performance. Just conversation. And God, talking to him felt dangerous. Not because it was difficult. Because it was easy. Too easy. We talked about everything for nearly 2 hours. Bad jobs. Childhood stories. Music. The bookstore renovation. My failed attempt at learning guitar when I was 16. Everett laughed hard enough at that story that I became offended on principle. You named the guitar? It helped emotionally. You named it Axel, Dylan. I was going through something. You were going through being deeply uncool. I stared at him. You literally work construction. Exactly. I know uncool when I see it. By the end of dinner, my face hurt from smiling. And somewhere in the middle of him talking about restoring old radios with his grandfather when he was younger, I realized something terrifying. I liked him. Not just physically. Not just because he looked at me like that. I genuinely liked being around him. Which meant I was officially in trouble. The drive back to my apartment felt quieter. Not awkward. Just heavier now. Important somehow. Everett parked outside my building but didn't rush to say goodnight. One hand rested loosely on the steering wheel, while city lights flickered across the windshield. I had a really good time tonight, he said finally. My chest tightened immediately. Yeah, I admitted softly. Me too. Then came the silence. That silence. The one where both people are suddenly aware of how close they are. Everett looked at me for a long second. And there it was again. That expression. Like he understood exactly what I was afraid of. You don't have to rush anything with me, he said quietly. I swallowed hard. I know. I mean it. The warmth in his voice nearly undid me completely. Because I believed him. And somehow that felt scarier than pressure ever could. After that first date, Everett started becoming part of my routine so naturally it scared me a little. Morning coffee before work. Random texts during lunch. Pictures of wiring disasters with captions like, "This feels illegal." Or, "If I die in this wall cavity, delete my browser history." And somehow, without either of us saying it outright, we kept finding reasons to see each other. 3 days after dinner, he showed up at the cafe 15 minutes before closing carrying takeout containers. "You can't bring outside food into a cafe," I informed him seriously. "Good thing I know the cute barista." I rolled my eyes so hard it physically hurt. Mia leaned toward me immediately. "If you don't marry that man, I will." Everett heard her. Good to know I have options. I hated how much I smiled around him now. That night we sat on the curb outside the cafe eating noodles straight from cartons while traffic moved past us in soft waves of light. It should have felt awkward. Instead, it felt strangely intimate. Everett sat beside me with one knee pulled up, hoodie sleeves shoved to his elbows, talking quietly about his day while I listened more than I spoke. Not because I was shy exactly. Because I liked hearing him. Liked the calm steadiness in his voice. "You always this quiet?" he asked eventually. "I talk." "You absolutely do." He nudged my shoulder lightly. "But you also disappear into your own head every couple minutes." I stared down into my noodles. "Sorry." "Why are you apologizing?" I blinked. Everett noticed every tiny thing. It was unsettling. "You don't have to perform around me, Dylan." There it was again. That impossible gentleness. I looked away toward the street because suddenly meeting his eyes felt too intense. "I'm trying not to mess this up," I admitted quietly. His expression softened instantly. "You think this is fragile?" "Yes." "Why?" The question came so simply that it almost hurt. I let out a slow breath. "Because people usually like the easy version of me," I said carefully. "The relaxed version. The version that doesn't overthink things." Everett stayed quiet, listening. "And when I stop being that version," I shrugged helplessly, "things get complicated." He looked at me for a long moment after that. Then he said something that lodged itself directly into my chest. "I don't think you know how easy you are to stay around." I genuinely didn't know what to do with that sentence. So I laughed nervously and said, "That sounded suspiciously romantic." "It was." "Jesus Christ." He grinned. And somehow, sitting there under the glow of a broken street lamp with cold noodles in my lap, I realized I was already halfway gone for him. The dangerous part came a week later. Because that's when Everett touched my hand for the first time. Really touched it. We were walking through a weekend street market downtown after he got off work early. Crowded sidewalks. Music somewhere in the distance. The smell of coffee and rain hanging in the air. I was telling him a story about Mia threatening a customer over pineapple syrup when someone shoved past us too quickly. Instinctively, Everett reached for my wrist. Just to steady me. But his hand stayed there afterward. Warm. Solid. My entire body went hyper-aware immediately. Everett noticed. His eyes flicked toward me carefully. "You okay?" "Yeah," I answered too fast. He started pulling his hand away instantly. And something inside me reacted before my brain caught up. I caught his fingers lightly. Not fully holding on. Just enough to stop him leaving. Everett looked at me then. That look again. Except this time there was something deeper underneath it now. Something quieter. "You sure?" he asked softly. I nodded. So he turned his hand slightly and intertwined our fingers. Simple. Natural. Like it wasn't a massive event at all. Meanwhile, my heart was attempting to launch itself directly out of my chest. We kept walking like that through the market. No one cared. No one stared. The world didn't explode. And yet I felt strangely emotional about it. Because it was small. That's what got me. Everett didn't treat holding my hand like some dramatic statement. He just did it because he wanted to. At one point he glanced over at me and smiled slightly. "You're thinking too hard again. I'm having an experience." You're holding hands, Dylan. You don't understand. I was emotionally repressed for years. That laugh again. Warm and low and impossible not to love. Love. The word hit me so suddenly I nearly stumbled. No. Absolutely not. Way too early. I spent the next hour aggressively not thinking about it while Everett casually destroyed my emotional defenses by existing near me. Then came the bookstore incident, which, in hindsight, changed everything. Everett finally convinced me to visit the renovation site after work one evening. It still looks terrible, he warned while unlocking the front door. The bookstore was closed during construction, lights dim except for a few work lamps glowing between shelves. Dust floated through the air softly. It smelled like wood and paper and fresh paint. I kind of love this, I admitted quietly. Everett smiled from a few feet away. Yeah? It feels. I looked around. Peaceful. For a second he just watched me. Then he said, almost to himself, You fit here. My chest tightened again. God, he said things so casually that completely wrecked me afterward. We wandered through half-finished aisles while he showed me what they were fixing. New wiring. Reading lights. Restored ceiling beams. And somewhere between the travel section and the back office, the power cut out again. Complete darkness. Seriously? Everett muttered. I laughed immediately. You're really bad at electricity for an electrician. Careful. I know where the breaker box is. You say that like it's threatening. A beat of silence. Then Everett's voice came softer from somewhere very close now. Dylan. My heartbeat stumbled instantly. Yeah? The emergency light near the back hallway flickered on dimly, casting weak golden light across the room. Enough to see him. Enough to see the way he was already looking at me. Too close. Way too close. And suddenly the air between us changed completely. Not joking anymore. Not casual. Everett's eyes moved slowly across my face like he was checking for hesitation. You can tell me to slow down anytime, he said quietly. I swallowed hard. Because the terrifying thing was, I didn't want him to. The bookstore suddenly felt very small. Or maybe it was just Everett standing that close to me. The emergency light behind him cast soft shadows across his face, catching the edge of his jaw and the tiredness under his eyes. He still smelled faintly like sawdust and rain and coffee. And he was looking at me carefully. Not assuming. Waiting. You got quiet, he said softly. I'm thinking. Dangerous hobby. I laughed under my breath, but it came out shaky. Everett noticed immediately. His expression softened even more. Hey, he said quietly. You okay? That should not have affected me as much as it did. Because most people asked questions casually. Everett asked them like the answers mattered. Yeah, I admitted. Just overwhelmed. With me? I hesitated. A little. He nodded once like that answer made perfect sense. Then, after a second, bad overwhelmed? No. The word came out too honestly to take back. Something shifted in his face at that. Not victory. Not smugness. Relief. Like he'd been trying very hard not to scare me away. You know what I think? He asked quietly. What? I think you spend so much time trying to predict what people want from you that nobody ever gets to see you relax. That hit way too hard. I looked away immediately. Everett stepped a little closer, slow enough that I could have moved if I wanted to. I didn't. Dylan. God, the way he said my name. I looked back at him. You don't have to be careful every second with me. The sincerity in his voice nearly undid me on the spot. Because I wanted to believe him. I already did believe him, honestly. And that was terrifying. You make this very difficult, I muttered. A small smile pulled at his mouth. Pretty sure you started it. I literally did not. You stared at me for a full 30 seconds the first time we met. You were wearing work boots. That explains absolutely nothing. I laughed again, softer this time, and somehow the tension eased just enough for me to breathe normally. Everett's eyes flicked briefly toward my mouth. Then back to my eyes immediately after, like he was making himself behave. That tiny moment sent heat rushing straight into my chest. "You're doing that thing again," he murmured. "What thing?" "Looking at me like you want to run away and stay at the same time." I opened my mouth. Closed it again. Because unfortunately he was exactly right. The silence stretched between us. Not awkward. Heavy. Important. Then Everett lifted one hand slowly toward my face, still giving me time to stop him. His fingers brushed lightly against my jaw. Just that. Nothing more. And somehow that tiny touch felt more intimate than anything I'd experienced before. My pulse went completely uneven. Everett noticed that too. "You're shaking," he whispered. "I hate how observant you are." His thumb moved slightly against my cheek. "You hate it?" "No," I admitted quietly. For a second neither of us moved at all. Then Everett leaned in. Slowly. Carefully. Like he was still asking permission even now. And when he kissed me, it was gentle enough to break my heart a little. No rush. No pressure. No performance. Just warmth. I'd expected fireworks or panic or some huge cinematic feeling. Instead, it felt strangely quiet. Like something settling into place. When he pulled back, his forehead rested lightly against mine. "You okay?" he asked softly. I laughed weakly in disbelief. "You seriously ask that after every emotionally devastating thing you do?" That got a quiet laugh out of him. But he still waited for an answer. And maybe that was the moment I realized how deep this thing already was becoming. Because nobody had ever handled me this carefully before. "Yeah," I whispered finally. "I'm okay." Everett smiled slightly. Then, because apparently the universe enjoys humiliating me personally, every light in the bookstore suddenly blasted back on at full brightness. I flinched so hard Everett burst out laughing. "Oh my God!" I groaned, covering my face. "That was traumatic. You should have seen your expression." "I'm leaving." "You're absolutely not leaving." He caught my wrist gently before I could take 2 dramatic steps away. Not trapping me. Just holding on. And when I looked back at him, still smiling at me under those stupid fluorescent lights, something warm twisted painfully in my chest again. Because this wasn't temporary. I could feel that already. Which meant eventually I'd have to decide how much of myself I was actually willing to let him keep. Things changed after the bookstore. Not dramatically. That was the weird part. Everett didn't suddenly become possessive or overly intense. He didn't start acting like we were in some movie. If anything, he got softer with me afterward. More careful. Which somehow affected me even worse. The next morning he still brought me coffee before my shift. Still leaned casually against the counter while I rang him up. Still looked at me like I was the only thing in the room worth paying attention to. But now I knew what his mouth felt like. Which made functioning normally almost impossible. "You're staring again," he murmured while I handed him his change. "I'm literally working." You're very smug for a man covered in drywall dust." He grinned. "You kissed me first." I nearly dropped the register drawer. "I absolutely did not." Everett leaned slightly closer across the counter, lowering his voice. "You leaned into it." My face went immediately hot. Mia walked by at exactly the wrong moment. Took one look at me, and sighed dramatically. "Oh, he's down catastrophically. I hate both of you." Everett looked unbearably pleased with himself after that. The problem was that every day with him made me less careful. And I didn't know if that was a good thing yet. A few nights later, Everett invited me over to his apartment for the first time. "Fair warning," he texted beforehand. "It's mostly tools and poor decisions." That turned out to be surprisingly accurate. His apartment sat above an old hardware store downtown. Small. Warm lighting. Records stacked beside a shelf overflowing with books and half-disassembled radios. It looked exactly like him somehow. Quiet. Steady. A little worn around the edges. "You actually live like an adult," I said while looking around. Everett took my jacket with a smile. Thank you. I worked hard to become emotionally available enough for indoor plants. I laughed softly, then noticed the plants. There were 6 of them. You water living things voluntarily? I know. Very brave of me. God, he was easy to be around. Dangerously easy. We spent most of the evening on his couch listening to music while he explained how he restored old radios in his spare time. I barely understood half of what he was saying. Didn't matter. I liked listening to him talk. At one point Everett looked over and caught me smiling at him without realizing it. What? I asked immediately. That look. There's apparently a lot of looks happening around me. This one's my favorite. My chest tightened. You flirt constantly, I accused weakly. Only when successful. I shook my head and looked away, but Everett gently caught my chin before I fully escaped. Not forceful. Just enough to bring my attention back to him. You know something? He said quietly. What? You get nervous every time somebody cares about you out loud. The room suddenly felt much quieter. Because once again, he was right. I stared at him for a second too long. Everett's thumb brushed lightly along my jaw. And there it was again. That terrifying feeling of being understood too clearly. I'm trying, I admitted softly. His expression changed instantly at that. Warmer. Almost emotional. I know you are. No one had ever said that to me before either. Not like that. Like trying mattered even before succeeding. The silence stretched comfortably afterward. Music humming softly from the record player. Rain tapping lightly against the windows. Everett's hand still resting against my face. Then he asked the question that ruined my emotional stability for the rest of the night. Can I tell you something honest? You usually do. A small smile. Fair. Then it faded slightly. I think about you constantly. My heartbeat stumbled immediately. Everett looked almost embarrassed admitting it, which somehow made it worse. Like, constantly, he continued quietly. At work. Driving home. Randomly during the day. He shook his head once. It's actually getting inconvenient. I stared at him. Nobody had ever wanted me so openly before. Not without games attached. Not without uncertainty. Everett just handed me the truth directly every single time. And I still didn't fully know how to hold it. You can't say things like that casually, I whispered. Why not? Because some of us are emotionally fragile. That made him laugh softly. Then he leaned forward and kissed me again. Slower this time. More familiar. And somewhere in the middle of it, my hand caught the front of his hoodie instinctively, holding on without thinking. Everett noticed. I felt him smile slightly against my mouth before pulling back just enough to look at me. There you are, he murmured. I frowned weakly. What does that mean? It means you stop hiding when you forget to. The terrifying thing? He sounded happy about it. Not triumphant. Just genuinely happy to see me relaxing around him. And that feeling, being wanted without needing to perform first, was becoming addictive. The first time Everett stayed over, either of us acknowledged it was happening. That probably should have warned me how deep in I already was. We'd ordered takeout after my shift and ended up back at his apartment because mine had aggressively bad lighting, according to him. It feels like a hospital waiting room in there. That's called affordable rent. No, Dylan. That's called a human rights violation. By midnight we were still sitting on his couch, talking about absolutely nothing important. And somehow those conversations kept becoming my favorite part. Not the flirting. Not even the kissing. Just this. Everett stretched one arm across the back of the couch while I sat tucked against the corner cushion, half facing him. You're doing it again, he murmured. I narrowed my eyes. I'm starting to think you invent behaviors just to bully me. The staring thing is real. I'm literally listening to you. You look at me like I'm explaining the meaning of life. Well, right now you're ranting emotionally about extension cords. They matter. I laughed quietly into my drink. Everett watched me for a second after that, not speaking. Then softer. There's that look again. The warmth in his voice immediately made me nervous. What look? The real one. I looked away automatically. And unfortunately, that seemed to prove his point. Everett shifted slightly closer on the couch. You know what I think? He asked quietly. Should I be afraid? A little. I groaned softly. Go ahead. I think nobody's ever made you feel safe enough to stop monitoring yourself. The room went silent. Because once again, somehow, he'd reached directly into the center of me without trying. I stared down at my hands. Everett didn't rush to fill the silence. That was another thing about him. He never grabbed at vulnerability once it appeared. He just stayed there beside it. Finally, I said quietly, You make it sound dramatic. I think it feels normal to you. He replied gently. That's different. My throat tightened unexpectedly. And before I could stop myself, words started slipping out that I hadn't planned on saying. In college, I admitted slowly, there was this guy I liked. Everett stayed completely still beside me. We were friends first. And I thought. I laughed weakly. I don't know what I thought. What happened? I swallowed. He liked attention. My fingers twisted together unconsciously. Liked flirting. Liked making comments when nobody else was around. I stared at the floor. Then one night he got drunk at a party and started joking about me in front of people. Everett's jaw tightened immediately. I kept talking before I could lose momentum. Nothing direct. Just enough that everybody understood. I shrugged carefully like it didn't still hurt. After that I got really good at making myself smaller. Silence. Then, Dylan. The anger in Everett's voice startled me. Not at me. For me. It's fine, I said automatically. No, he said quietly. It isn't. That hit harder than I expected. Because most people reacted to uncomfortable things by minimizing them. Moving on. Making jokes. Everett looked genuinely upset that someone had made me feel ashamed of myself. You know what I hate? He asked softly. What? That somebody convinced you being careful all the time was maturity. I looked at him then. Really looked at him. At the exhaustion under his eyes from long workdays. At the warmth in his expression. At the restraint he constantly showed with me. And suddenly the thought arrived fully formed and terrifying. I could fall in love with him. Not someday. I already was. The realization must have shown on my face somehow because Everett's expression softened immediately. What? He asked gently. I panicked instantly. Nothing. Dylan. I'm thinking. That's usually dangerous. I laughed weakly, but my chest felt painfully tight now. Everett studied me carefully for another second before shifting closer. Then, very softly, Hey! I looked at him. And the second our eyes met, my entire defense system collapsed. Because he looked at me like I mattered already. Not potentially. Not conditionally. Already. You don't have to say anything you're not ready to say, he murmured. God. Nobody should have been allowed to understand me this well. Before I could respond, Everett reached for my hand slowly, giving me time like always. I intertwined our fingers immediately this time. No hesitation. Something changed in his expression at that. Subtle. Warm. Almost relieved. Then he lifted our joined hands slightly and pressed a soft kiss against my knuckles. The gesture hit me so hard emotionally I actually looked away. Everett noticed and smiled faintly. Too much? You're impossible, I muttered. That's not an answer. I took a breath. Then another. And finally admitted the truth quietly into the space between us. No one's ever been this gentle with me before. The room went completely still. Everett's thumb brushed slowly against the back of my hand. And when he answered, his voice sounded almost rough. That's their failure. Not yours. I swear something in my chest cracked open after that. I realized I loved Everett on a Tuesday. Not during some huge emotional moment. Not while kissing him. Not while holding his hand. Not even during one of those devastatingly sincere conversations he kept pulling out of me without trying. It happened because I got sick. That was it. I caught some awful cold from a customer at the cafe and spent 2 straight days miserable in my apartment wrapped in blankets and self-pity. And Everett showed up anyway. Absolutely not. I mumbled when I opened the door and saw him holding grocery bags. You'll get sick. I work around exposed insulation and mold professionally, he replied calmly while stepping inside. I've made peace with death. You're very dramatic for an electrician. You look like you're actively fading away. I probably did. My hair was a disaster. My voice sounded wrecked. I was wearing an old hoodie with paint stains on it. Everett looked at me like I was still something worth crossing the city for. That feeling alone nearly killed me harder than the fever. You didn't have to come over, I muttered while he unpacked soup containers in my kitchen. He glanced at me like the answer was obvious. Yes, I did. Simple. Certain. Like caring about me wasn't inconvenient at all. I sat at the counter wrapped in a blanket, while Everett moved around my kitchen making tea like he'd lived there for years. And somewhere between him arguing with my terrible medicine cabinet organization and threatening to throw away expired cough syrup, it hit me fully. This is what safe feels like. Not dramatic intensity. Not confusion. Not constantly analyzing every interaction. Just someone showing up consistently and meaning it. Everett caught me staring again while stirring tea. There's the look. You've ruined my ability to make eye contact normally. He smiled slightly. You okay? And maybe it was the fever. Maybe it was exhaustion. Maybe I was simply too tired to keep protecting myself. Because instead of deflecting like usual, I answered honestly. I think I'm a little in love with you. Silence. Complete silence. My own heartbeat became immediately unbearable. Oh my God! I muttered, covering my face with the blanket. Forget I said that. I'm medicated. This isn't legally binding. Everett didn't laugh. Which terrified me for approximately 2 seconds until I felt his hands gently pulling the blanket away from my face. Dylan. I looked up slowly. And the expression on his face absolutely wrecked me. Soft. Stunned. Warm in a way I'd never seen before. You think you're the only one? He asked quietly. My chest physically hurt. Everett stepped closer until he stood between my knees where I sat at the counter. I've been trying not to say it too early, he admitted softly. Because I didn't want you feeling pressured. That sounded exactly like him. Always careful with me. Always trying to make space instead of taking it. I laughed weakly. You're handling this emotionally maturely and it's honestly very annoying. That finally made him smile. Then he touched my face gently, thumb brushing against my cheek the same way he had in the bookstore weeks earlier. Only now there was no uncertainty left between us. I love you too, he said quietly. And just like that, everything changed. Not explosively. Not in some cinematic earth-shattering way. It changed like the moment right before sunrise when darkness quietly stops being darkness. I actually felt tears sting unexpectedly behind my eyes, which was deeply embarrassing. Everett noticed immediately. You okay? He asked softly. You seriously need a new line? You didn't answer. I laughed again, watery this time. Yeah, I whispered. I'm okay. He kissed me then. Slow and warm and familiar. And for the first time in my life, I didn't feel afraid while someone loved me openly. A month later, Everett came into the cafe near closing time carrying his toolbox again. Mia spotted him first and groaned dramatically. If the two of you start flirting in front of customers again, I'm quitting. No, you're not, Everett said calmly. Correct. I'm too invested now. I rolled my eyes while Everett approached the counter smiling slightly at me. And there it was again. That look. Only now I understood it completely. It had never been about figuring me out. Everett looked at me like someone seeing a person clearly and liking every part anyway. You off in 10? He asked. 5. Good. His fingers brushed lightly against mine on the counter. There's a bookstore reopening tonight. I smiled immediately. The one you renovated? You just want to show off your wiring. It's excellent wiring. I laughed softly. Then, without thinking about it, I leaned across the counter and kissed him quickly. Right there. In the light. In front of everybody. No panic afterward. No shame. No instinct to hide. Just warmth. Everett looked slightly stunned for half a second before smiling in that quiet way that still completely unraveled me. Mia put a hand dramatically over her heart. Oh, they're disgustingly in love now. She wasn't wrong. And later that night, standing beside Everett inside that warm, glowing bookstore while people wandered quietly through restored aisles around us, he slipped his hand into mine naturally like breathing. No hesitation. I looked up at him once. And he looked back at me exactly the same way he had from the beginning. Like he understood. Only now, finally, I wasn't scared of that anymore. I wasn't expecting the question. That's the part that still gets me when I think back on it. Not the flashing lights behind me. Not the cold rain hitting the hood of my car at 2 in the morning. Not even the fact that a police officer was standing beside my window while my hands gripped the steering wheel hard enough to hurt. It was the question. Because some questions sound simple until they hit the exact place you've spent years trying not to look at. You got someone you can call tonight? Officer Sawyer asked it casually. Calm voice. Neutral expression. Like he'd probably asked 100 people the same thing that week. But I froze. Not because I didn't have anyone. Because I immediately thought of Logan. And Logan was exactly the person I wasn't supposed to call anymore. The rain streaked across my windshield while Sawyer waited beside the door, flashlight lowered now, giving me space to answer. He was taller up close than he'd looked in my rearview mirror. Broad shoulders under the dark uniform, soaked from standing outside too long. His badge caught the glow of passing headlights every few seconds. You okay? He asked. I realized I'd been silent too long. Yeah, I lied quickly. Just tired. That earned me a look. Not suspicious exactly. Just observant. I'd been pulled over because I drifted over the center line twice leaving downtown. No alcohol. No drugs. I'd passed all of that immediately. But apparently looking exhausted and driving in the rain at 2 a.m. was enough to trigger concern. Honestly, fair. You sure you should be driving? Sawyer asked. That should have annoyed me. Instead, I almost laughed. Because if he knew where I'd just come from, he probably would have taken my keys completely. I'm fine, I said again. Another lie. The truth was I'd just spent 40 minutes sitting outside Logan's apartment building like a complete idiot. I hadn't gone inside. Hadn't texted him. Hadn't even gotten out of the car. Just sat there staring at the lit window of apartment 4B wondering if he was awake. Wondering if he still slept on the left side of the bed. Wondering if he still kept the stupid lamp I bought him at a flea market because he claimed it looked aggressively ugly. We'd been broken up for 4 months. 4 months, 2 weeks, and 3 days. Yeah. I knew the exact count. Pathetic, right? Sawyer shifted slightly beside the car. Look, I'm not trying to make your night harder. But you look like someone who probably shouldn't be alone right now. Something about the way he said it cracked through me a little. Not pity. Not judgment. Just honest concern. And maybe I was more fragile than I thought, because before I could stop myself, I asked. You ever miss somebody you know you shouldn't? The words slipped out quietly. Barely audible under the rain. Sawyer blinked once. That definitely wasn't the answer he expected. For a second, either of us spoke. Water tapped steadily against the roof of the car while headlights washed across the empty road behind him. Then he rested one arm against the edge of my window and said carefully, Yeah. That was it. One word. But something about the way he said it told me he wasn't just humoring me to get through the traffic stop. He meant it. I looked away first, embarrassed by how suddenly tight my chest felt. I didn't mean to say that out loud, I muttered. Sawyer surprised me by smiling a little. Not mocking. Just tired. Most people say weirder things when they're nervous. I'm not nervous. That's so? I glanced up at him finally. I'm having a bad night. There's a difference. His expression softened slightly at that. How bad? I almost said fine again automatically. But something about sitting there in the dark with a stranger felt strangely easier than talking to anyone who actually knew me. So before my brain could stop me, I admitted. I drove across town just to sit outside my ex's apartment for an hour. Sawyer was quiet for a beat. Did you go in? No. Did you want to? I laughed once under my breath. That's kind of the problem. The rain picked up harder around us. He nodded slowly like he understood more than he was letting on. What happened? He asked. Now that question should have been easy. People break up every day. Usually there's a clean explanation. Cheating. Fighting. Distance. Something concrete. But Logan and I hadn't ended because we stopped loving each other. We ended because loving each other started feeling heavier than breathing. And I had no idea how to explain that to a police officer standing in the rain at 2 in the morning. So instead I said, we kept hurting each other without meaning to. Sawyer looked at me for a long moment after that. Then quietly, those are usually the worst ones. I don't know why that hit me so hard. Maybe because everyone else in my life had treated the breakup like a problem to solve. Move on. Delete his number. Get over it. Go out more. Download dating apps. Nobody ever acknowledged that losing someone who loved you gently could hurt just as much as losing someone cruel. Logan had never been cruel. That was the problem. He was kind. Patient. Funny in quiet ways that snuck up on you. He remembered things. Tiny things. Like how I hated tomatoes but only when they were warm. Or how I couldn't sleep without background noise. He also had this habit of touching the back of my neck whenever he passed behind me in the kitchen. Small, absent-minded, affectionate. For 2 years, that touch meant home. Until somehow it didn't anymore. Sawyer glanced toward the empty road behind him, then back at me. What's your name? He asked. Ethan. He nodded once. Okay, Ethan. Here's what I think. I almost smiled. This should be good. I think you're exhausted, he said. I think you probably shouldn't drive tonight. And I think sitting outside your ex's apartment in the rain listening to sad music is making everything worse. I stared at him. How do you know there was sad music? That finally got a real laugh out of him. Because there's always sad music. And annoyingly, he was right. The worst part is I almost trusted him immediately after that. Which was ridiculous. He was still a stranger. Still a cop. Still someone who technically pulled me over. But standing there soaked from the rain with tired eyes and a voice too calm for this hour of night, Sawyer didn't feel intimidating anymore. He felt human. Do you actually have someone you can call? He asked again. And there it was. The question. The one I wasn't ready for. Because the truthful answer was yes. The person I wanted to call was Logan. Always Logan. I can call someone, I said finally. Sawyer leaned slightly against the doorframe of the car. But you don't want to. It wasn't really a question. I looked down at my hands on the steering wheel and gave a small shrug. Something like that. The rain kept falling hard enough to blur the city lights into smears of gold and red. Somewhere in the distance, tires hissed across wet pavement. Sawyer was still watching me carefully. You mind if I ask something personal? He said. I laughed tiredly. Feels a little late for boundaries. That earned another quick smile. What made you stop talking? My chest tightened immediately. Because there were 100 little answers to that question. The fights. The silences afterward. The way Logan started looking exhausted every time we tried to fix things. The way I always pushed when he shut down. The way he always shut down when I pushed. But underneath all of it was one ugly truth I still hated admitting. I was the one who left. Not because I wanted to. Because I got scared of how much I needed him. And once that kind of fear gets inside a relationship, it poisons everything quietly. I swallowed hard. I told him I needed space. Sawyer stayed quiet. And? He asked gently. And he believed me. That one still hurt the most. Logan didn't beg. Didn't fight. Didn't chase me down dramatically. He just looked at me across our kitchen table with the saddest expression I'd ever seen and nodded once. Okay, he'd said quietly. Like he was respecting something that was killing him. I'd hated him for making it easy. For not stopping me. Except deep down, I knew he understood before I did. I wasn't leaving because I wanted freedom. I was leaving because loving someone that much terrified me. Sawyer exhaled slowly through his nose. You still love him? I looked up sharply. That obvious? Yeah. I laughed again, softer this time. Great. He studied me for another second before asking. You think he still loves you? And there it was. The question I avoided every single day. Because if the answer was no, then I'd destroyed the best thing in my life for nothing. And if the answer was yes? That might have been worse. I don't know, I admitted quietly. The truth was Logan had stopped reaching out 2 months ago. No random texts. No late-night check-ins. No accidental reasons to call. At first I thought it meant he was moving on. Then I realized maybe he was finally trying to heal. And somehow that hurt even more. Sawyer pushed away from the car slightly and glanced toward his patrol vehicle. I should probably let you go, he said. Something in my chest sank unexpectedly at that. Not because I knew him. I didn't. But because for 20 minutes on a rain-soaked street, I hadn't felt alone. And apparently that mattered more than I wanted it to. He must have noticed something shift in my expression because his voice softened again. Hey! I looked up. Don't go back to the apartment tonight. I frowned slightly. Why? Because if you were gonna knock on his door, you would have already done it. That landed harder than it should have. Sawyer continued. And sitting outside replaying old memories isn't helping either of you. I looked away toward the blurred outline of downtown. Then what am I supposed to do? He was quiet for a second before answering. Go home. Sleep a little. Figure out whether you miss him, or whether you miss not feeling alone. That one hit like a punch. Because I'd spent 4 months assuming they were the same thing. Sawyer stepped back from the car then, rain immediately soaking through his sleeves again. But before he closed the conversation completely, he hesitated. Then, for what it's worth. I waited. If somebody sat outside my apartment for an hour in the rain, he said carefully, I'd probably want them to knock. And for the first time that night, I genuinely didn't know what to say. He gave me one last nod. Drive safe, Ethan. Then he turned and walked back toward the patrol car, red and blue lights washing across the wet street behind him. I sat there for a long moment after he left. Engine running. Hands still tight around the wheel. Thinking about Logan. About the last night in our apartment. About how he'd stood in the kitchen while I packed a duffel bag I never should have touched. You don't have to leave tonight, he'd said quietly. And God, the worst part? He meant it. Even heartbroken, Logan still tried to make things easier for me. I remembered how tired he looked. How carefully he spoke, like one wrong word might shatter both of us completely. Maybe this is what you need, he'd told me. Not angry. Not bitter. Just sad. At the time, I convinced myself leaving was the brave thing. Now I wasn't sure anymore. My phone sat face down in the cup holder beside me. I stared at it. Then picked it up. Then put it back down again immediately. Because what exactly was I supposed to say after 4 months? Hey, sorry I emotionally detonated our relationship because I got scared. Miss me? You awake? I leaned back against the seat and shut my eyes hard. And immediately heard Logan's voice in my head. You don't always have to run the second something matters to you. He said that during a fight once. Not yelling. Not cruel. Just exhausted. At the time, I got defensive immediately. Now I hated how right he'd been. My phone buzzed suddenly in my hand and scared the hell out of me. For one insane second, my heart jumped thinking somehow it was Logan. It wasn't. Unknown number. I frowned and answered cautiously. Hello? A pause. Then, didn't think you'd actually pick up. Sawyer. I sat up straighter automatically. Officer stalking civilians now? I heard the smile in his voice immediately. Relax. You left before I could give you your license back. I blinked. Then looked down toward the passenger seat. Sure enough. No wallet. Oh, I muttered. That's embarrassing. A little. I laughed despite myself. And weirdly, it felt good. Normal. Human. I can swing back around, he offered. You still parked near Maple and 9th? I looked out through the rain-covered windshield toward the direction of Logan's apartment. Then slowly put the car into drive. No, I said quietly. I'm heading home now. I didn't expect to hear from Sawyer again after that night. Honestly, I figured once he handed my license back in a grocery store parking lot 20 minutes later, that would be it. A weird interaction. A rough night. A stranger who happened to catch me at my lowest. Instead, he leaned against my car window while rain dripped from the edge of his jacket and said, You look slightly less miserable now. I snorted softly. High praise. I'm serious. Earlier you looked like someone debating whether to drive into the ocean. That dramatic? 100%. I shook my head, smiling despite myself. It should have ended there. But neither of us moved. The parking lot was nearly empty at that hour, washed silver under streetlights and rainwater. Sawyer handed me my wallet through the window, fingers brushing mine for half a second. Then he glanced toward the coffee shop across the street. You eaten anything tonight? I frowned slightly. Are cops allowed to ask people out during traffic stops? That caught him off guard enough to laugh. This is not me asking you out. It's me making sure you don't spiral emotionally alone before sunrise. Wow, I said dryly. You really know how to charm people. You coming or not? That's how I ended up sitting across from Officer Sawyer Reynolds at 3 in the morning drinking terrible diner coffee while rain hammered against the windows. And somehow, it was the easiest conversation I'd had in months. His first name being Sawyer felt strange after the uniform. Too personal somehow. But he didn't feel like a cop in the diner booth across from me. Not really. Just tired. There were faint shadows under his eyes like he didn't sleep enough. His dark hair was still damp from the rain, sleeves rolled halfway up his forearms now that we were inside somewhere warm. You always pick up emotionally damaged strangers during shifts? I asked. He stirred cream into his coffee lazily. Only the special ones. I rolled my eyes. But my chest did something annoying anyway. Sawyer noticed. Noticed everything, actually. That was becoming a problem. So, he said after a minute, tell me something good about Logan. The question caught me completely off guard. Most people asked what went wrong. Sawyer asked what was good. And suddenly all I could think about was Logan laughing in our kitchen at 1 in the morning while making pancakes badly. Logan singing wrong lyrics confidently in the car. Logan asleep with one arm thrown across my stomach like he thought I might disappear overnight. I stared down into my coffee. He made everywhere feel quieter, I said softly. Sawyer didn't interrupt. Not boring quiet, I added. Just safe. Like my brain could finally shut up around him. That sounds important. It was. The diner lights buzzed softly overhead. Outside, the rain still hadn't stopped. And you left anyway, Sawyer said carefully. No judgment in it. Just truth. I nodded once. I thought if I pulled away before things got worse, maybe we could avoid destroying each other. Sawyer leaned back slightly in the booth. Did it work? I laughed under my breath. No, because the truth was breaking up with Logan hadn't made the fear disappear. It just replaced it with grief. And grief was somehow heavier. Sawyer studied me quietly for a second. Then, you know what the weird thing about heartbreak is? What? People always act like losing someone means the relationship failed. I looked up at him. But sometimes, he continued, it just means two people didn't know how to carry something heavy at the same time. That sat between us for a long moment. I frowned slightly. You sound like someone speaking from experience. Sawyer smiled faintly into his coffee. Maybe. There was something in the way he said it that made me stop pushing. Some stories announce themselves loudly. Others sit quietly behind a person's eyes. Sawyer's felt like the second kind. A waitress came by to refill our coffee. Sawyer thanked her automatically, polite without even thinking about it. Then he looked back at me. You still have his number saved? I almost laughed. Obviously. You looked at it tonight. I hesitated. Yeah. But you didn't call. No. Sawyer nodded once slowly like he understood exactly what that meant. You know what I think? He asked. This should be interesting. I think you're waiting for certainty before you talk to him again. I stared at him. Because annoyingly? That was exactly it. I wanted guarantees. Proof. Some impossible reassurance that reaching back toward Logan wouldn't ruin me completely. Sawyer tapped one finger lightly against his coffee mug. But relationships don't work like that, he said quietly. Nobody gets certainty first. I looked out the window toward the rain. What if he's happier without me? Sawyer was quiet for a second before answering. Then at least you'll know. That answer hurt. Because it was honest. And honesty was becoming a dangerous thing around him. By the time we left the diner, the rain had slowed into a light drizzle. The city felt softer near dawn. Empty intersections. Wet sidewalks glowing gold under streetlights. Sawyer walked beside me toward my car with his hands in his pockets. You gonna sleep now? He asked. I'll try. You don't believe me. I think you're gonna sit in your apartment staring at your phone for 3 hours. I smiled reluctantly. Little judgmental for a public servant. He stopped beside my driver's door. Up close again. I noticed how tired he looked. Not physically. Something deeper than that. Like someone who carried too much quietly. Thank you, I said before I could overthink it. Sawyer glanced at me. For what? For stopping me tonight. A strange expression crossed his face then. Brief but real. You weren't really driving toward his apartment, he said softly. I frowned. What? You were driving toward an answer. The scary part? He was right. And somehow that felt worse. We stood there for a second too long. Close enough now that I could smell coffee and rain on him. Close enough that something unfamiliar tightened low in my chest. Sawyer noticed the shift immediately. His eyes flicked down toward my mouth for half a second before returning to my eyes. Then he stepped back first. Professional again. Careful. Get home safe, Ethan. I swallowed once. Yeah. You too. He nodded once and walked away toward his patrol car. I watched him go longer than I should have. And sometime during the drive home, I realized something that unsettled me completely. For the first time in 4 months, Logan wasn't the only person I couldn't stop thinking about anymore. The problem with meeting someone at the exact moment your heart is still broken is that you start noticing things you shouldn't. Little things. Like how Sawyer always listened without interrupting. How his voice got quieter when conversations became honest. How his eyes stayed on mine a second too long before he looked away. I told myself it didn't mean anything. It absolutely meant something. 3 days after the traffic stop, I saw him again completely by accident. At least, I think it was an accident. I was standing in line at a small coffee shop near my office when I heard, "You look more rested." I turned so fast I nearly dropped my phone. Sawyer stood behind me wearing dark jeans and a black hoodie instead of the uniform this time. No badge. No duty belt. Just him. Which somehow felt more dangerous. "Oh," I said intelligently. He smiled slightly. "Strong opening. What are you doing here?" "I could ask you the same thing. I work 2 blocks away." "That answers your question too, then." "Right. Of course." I suddenly became painfully aware of how ordinary I looked. Wrinkled button down. Messy hair from running late. Half-awake expression. Sawyer, annoyingly, still looked unfairly good. "You stalking emotionally unstable civilians off duty now?" I asked. "That depends. You still emotionally unstable?" I laughed before I could stop myself. And there it was again, that weird, easy feeling around him. Like talking to Sawyer required less effort than talking to most people. The line moved forward slowly. "You call him?" Sawyer asked quietly. Straight to it. I stared at him for a second. "Good morning to you too." His mouth twitched. "No," I admitted finally. "I didn't. You want to?" Every question from him felt too direct. Too observant. "Yes," I said softly. "And no." Sawyer nodded like that made perfect sense. Because somehow, to him, it probably did. We ended up sitting together by the window with coffee neither of us really touched. Morning traffic crawled outside while sunlight pushed through gray clouds left over from the storm. "You know what I think your problem is?" Sawyer said. I narrowed my eyes. "You seem to think about my problems a lot." "I'm serious." "That's concerning." He ignored me completely. "You keep treating love like it's either completely safe or completely doomed." I blinked. "Normal people don't psychoanalyze strangers before 9 a.m., I informed him. "Normal people don't sit outside their ex's apartment in thunderstorms." "Fair." Sawyer leaned back slightly in his chair. "You loved him," he said carefully. "That part's obvious. But every time things became uncertain, you pulled away first so you wouldn't be the one left behind." I stared at him. "Because hearing your worst habits spoken out loud by someone who barely knows you is deeply unpleasant. You do realize I hate this conversation, right?" He smiled into his coffee. "Yeah. Little arrogant for a cop. Occupational hazard." I should have been annoyed. Instead, I found myself watching the way sunlight caught against the faint scar near his jaw I hadn't noticed before. And that realization hit me like ice water. This was bad. Because attraction after heartbreak feels dangerous enough already. Attraction towards someone emotionally perceptive? Absolutely fatal. Sawyer noticed me looking immediately. His eyes flicked toward mine. I looked away first. "Coward." "So," I said quickly, changing subjects, "you gonna tell me your tragic backstory now, or do cops make you sign secrecy agreements?" That earned a quieter smile this time. "I was engaged once." The words landed softly between us. And suddenly I understood the sadness in his eyes. "Oh," I said carefully. "Yeah." I waited. Sawyer traced one finger around the rim of his coffee cup absently. "He left about a year ago." Something tightened unexpectedly in my chest. "I'm sorry." He shrugged once, but it looked practiced. "He wasn't wrong to." "That doesn't mean it didn't hurt." Sawyer glanced at me then, expression unreadable. "No," he admitted quietly. "It didn't." Outside the window, people rushed past carrying umbrellas and briefcases and normal lives. Inside the coffee shop, everything suddenly felt smaller. More personal. "What happened?" I asked softly. Sawyer was quiet long enough that I thought maybe he wouldn't answer. Then, "I spent so much time trying to take care of everyone around me," he said slowly, "that I forgot relationships need more than stability." I frowned slightly. He said loving me felt lonely. That sentence stayed suspended between us. Heavy. Honest. And God, I understood it immediately. Because Logan used to say something similar. Not identical. But close. "You make people feel safe," Logan told me once during a fight. But you don't let them reach you when you're hurting. At the time I got defensive. Now I wondered if he'd been right too. Sawyer glanced toward the clock behind the counter and sighed softly. I should get to work. Some irrational disappointment moved through me immediately. Which was ridiculous. I barely knew him. But sitting across from Sawyer felt dangerously like relief. He stood, pulling his hoodie sleeve down over his wrist absent-mindedly. Then he looked at me carefully. You don't have to figure your whole life out before talking to Logan again. I looked down at my untouched coffee. What if I already ruined it? Sawyer was quiet for a second. Then, people who stop loving you usually don't haunt you like this. That line followed me the entire day. Through meetings. Through emails. Through pretending to pay attention, while my brain replayed every conversation Logan and I ever had. By evening, I was sitting alone in my apartment staring at my phone again. Logan's contact still pinned at the top. Still impossible to delete. My thumb hovered over the screen. Call. Text. Anything. Instead, I locked the phone and threw it onto the couch beside me. Coward. A second later, the screen lit back up. Unknown number. My heart jumped stupidly before I answered. Hello? You always answer unknown calls this fast? Sawyer. I leaned back against the couch immediately. You know, this is getting suspicious. I left my sunglasses at the coffee shop, he said. Thought maybe you stole them. I laughed softly. And for the first time in months, it didn't feel forced. I should have stopped answering Sawyer's calls. That probably would have been the smart thing to do. Because somewhere between the rainy traffic stop and the third late-night conversation that week, something shifted. Not dramatically. Just quietly enough to become dangerous. You know, I said one night, phone pressed between my shoulder and ear while I washed dishes. Most people don't casually call civilians this much. Sawyer's low laugh crackled softly through the speaker. Most civilians don't accidentally become my favorite part of night shift. My hand stopped mid-motion in the sink. Silence. Then Sawyer cleared his throat lightly like he realized what he just admitted. Well, he said carefully. That sounded more intense out loud. He'd climbed immediately up my neck. The scary part? I didn't want him to take it back. Over the next 2 weeks, talking to Sawyer became strangely normal. Morning texts. Random conversations during his breaks. Late-night calls when neither of us could sleep. Nothing flirtatious exactly. Except sometimes absolutely flirtatious. And every time it started feeling too real, one thought crashed into me immediately afterward. Logan. Because no matter how easy Sawyer felt, I still loved someone else. That truth sat underneath everything like an ache I couldn't remove. I think Sawyer knew it too. He never pushed. Never crossed lines directly. But sometimes there were pauses between us that felt loaded anyway. Like both of us standing near something neither one wanted to touch first. The first real crack came on a Thursday night. I'd had a brutal day at work, the kind where every tiny inconvenience feels personal by the end of it. I was exhausted, irritable, emotionally wrung out. And somehow, without even thinking about it, I called Logan. Not Sawyer. Logan. The second I heard the ringing, panic hit immediately. What the hell was I doing? I almost hung up. Then his voice answered softly. Ethan? My chest folded in on itself. Because even after 4 months, Logan still sounded like home. For a second neither of us spoke. Then quietly. Hey. God. He sounded surprised. Careful. Hopeful, maybe, which somehow hurt the most. You okay? He asked immediately. Same Logan. Always worried about me first. I sat down slowly on the edge of my couch. Yeah. My throat tightened unexpectedly. I don't know why I called. A long silence. Then Logan said gently, I think you probably do. I shut my eyes hard. The apartment suddenly felt too quiet. How've you been? I asked softly. Logan laughed once under his breath, tired. That's a dangerous question. Yeah? Yeah. There was history packed inside that single word. Missed nights. Fights that ended in silence. The way we both kept loving each other badly toward the end because either one knew how to stop hurting. I miss you, I admitted before I could stop myself. The silence on the other end became so quiet I thought maybe the call dropped. Then finally. I know. Not cold. Not angry. Worse. Gentle. I miss you too, Logan said quietly. And just like that, every wall I'd spent months building cracked straight down the middle. I pressed my hand hard against my forehead. This was a mistake. No, Logan said immediately. Don't do that. I don't even know what I'm asking for. You don't have to. God, that voice. Steady. Patient. I remembered sleeping beside him during thunderstorms because he knew I hated them. I remembered his hand finding mine automatically during movies. I remembered every moment I convinced myself leaving him was somehow protecting us. And suddenly I wanted to get in my car and drive straight to him again. Terrifying. Ethan, Logan said softly after a long silence. Are you happy? That question hit harder than anything Sawyer had asked me. Because I didn't know the answer anymore. I thought about Sawyer laughing quietly over the phone at 2 a.m. About diner coffee. About feeling seen in ways that scared me. Then I thought about Logan. And realized those feelings weren't replacing each other. That was the problem. I don't know, I admitted honestly. Logan exhaled softly. I think we both got really good at loving each other when things were calm, he said carefully. But neither of us knew what to do once things became painful. Tears burned unexpectedly behind my eyes. Because that was exactly it. No villains. No betrayal. Just two people drowning quietly while trying not to scare each other. I'm sorry, I whispered. Logan was quiet for a second. Then, I know you are. That forgiveness almost destroyed me. After we hung up, I sat motionless on the couch for nearly 20 minutes staring at nothing. And right on schedule, my phone buzzed again. Sawyer. Of course. I stared at his name lighting up the screen. Didn't answer immediately. Then finally picked up. Hey, Sawyer said softly. Something in my silence must have tipped him off instantly. What happened? I laughed weakly under my breath. You always know. You sound different. I leaned my head back against the couch cushion and shut my eyes. I called him. Sawyer went quiet immediately. Not awkward. Just listening. And? He asked carefully. I swallowed hard. And now I feel like I can't breathe. A long pause stretched between us. Then Sawyer asked quietly. Do you want him back? The terrible part? I opened my mouth to answer. And realized I didn't know anymore. Sawyer didn't say anything right away after I admitted I didn't know. And honestly, that silence felt kinder than advice would have. I sat curled into the corner of my couch with my phone pressed against my ear while the city hummed quietly outside my apartment windows. Finally, Sawyer spoke. You don't have to answer immediately. I laughed weakly. Feels like I should. Why? Because normal people probably don't develop emotional crises over two men simultaneously. That's not what this is. I frowned slightly. Then what is it? Sawyer exhaled softly on the other end of the line. It sounds like you're grieving one relationship while accidentally starting to care about someone else. My chest tightened. Because hearing it said out loud made everything feel dangerously real. I barely know you, I said quietly. You know enough. The scary part? He was right too. I knew Sawyer listened carefully. I knew he carried sadness quietly. I knew he noticed when my voice changed even over the phone. And somehow those small things had become important to me frighteningly fast. You know what the worst part is? I admitted softly. What? I think if I'd met you before Logan, this would feel simple. The line went very quiet. Then Sawyer said carefully, but you didn't. God. Something about the gentleness in his voice hurt. Because he understood exactly what I meant. This wasn't some dramatic love triangle. It was timing. Messy, unfair timing. I don't want to hurt anyone, I whispered. Sawyer laughed softly then, tired more than amused. Ethan, I'm a grown man. Not a wounded bird. That's not what I meant. I know. Another silence stretched between us. Then Sawyer asked quietly. When you talked to Logan tonight, what did you feel? I shut my eyes immediately. Too much. Relief. Grief. Comfort. Fear. Like reopening a door I'd spent months trying to nail shut. He still feels like home, I admitted. Sawyer was quiet for a second. Then softly. Okay. No jealousy. No bitterness. Just acceptance. And somehow that made my chest ache even worse. You deserve better than this conversation, I muttered. You think caring about somebody only counts when the timing's perfect? I leaned forward, elbows against my knees. You make everything sound easy. Sawyer laughed under his breath. Trust me. It's not. I thought about his ex-fiancée. About loving me felt lonely. About the sadness that lived quietly behind his eyes. No. Easy definitely wasn't the right word. You know what I think? Sawyer said after a moment. That's becoming a dangerous sentence from you. I think you're trying to decide your entire future before taking a single step. I rubbed tiredly at my face. Probably. You don't have to know who you'll love forever, he said carefully. You just have to be honest about where your heart actually is right now. That should have clarified things. Instead, it made everything harder. Because my heart was still tangled around Logan in ways I couldn't deny. But Sawyer had become important too, and pretending otherwise felt dishonest now. The realization sat heavily in my chest. You still there? Sawyer asked softly. Yeah. You spiraling? A little. That earned a quiet laugh. Then, can I ask you something selfish? I blinked slightly. Depends. If Logan called tomorrow and asked you to come home, would you? The question hit so hard I stopped breathing for a second. Because 2 weeks ago the answer would have been immediate. Yes. Now there was hesitation. And Sawyer heard it. The silence stretched too long. Oh, he said quietly. I swallowed hard. I don't know what that means. It means things changed. His voice stayed calm, but something underneath it shifted slightly anyway. Not anger. Just vulnerability. And suddenly I realized this wasn't theoretical for him anymore either. That realization scared me more than anything else had. Because I could survive heartbreak. What terrified me was becoming the person who caused it. Sawyer, you don't owe me certainty, he interrupted gently. I asked. I pressed my fingers hard against my forehead. This is such a mess. Yeah, he admitted softly. It is. For a while either of us spoke. The connection stayed open anyway. And weirdly, that silence felt intimate. Comfortable. Dangerous. Finally Sawyer sighed quietly. I should probably sleep before my shift tomorrow. Right. Neither of us hung up. Another pause. Then softly. For what it's worth, Ethan. Yeah? I'm glad you answered my call that night. My chest tightened painfully. Because I was glad too. Even now. Even complicated. I'm glad too, I admitted. Another silence. Then Sawyer said goodnight quietly and the line disconnected. I sat alone in my apartment afterwards staring at the dark screen of my phone. And for the first time since Logan and I broke up, I understood something terrifying. Moving on wasn't a clean process. Sometimes your heart reached backward and forward at the exact same time. And maybe the real problem wasn't choosing between Logan and Sawyer. Maybe it was figuring out who I became after losing one person, while slowly falling toward another. I avoided both of them for 3 days. Logan because hearing his voice cracked me open again. Sawyer because I was afraid he'd hear the answer I still couldn't say out loud. Which, apparently, made me emotionally mature enough to qualify as a houseplant. By the third night, even I was sick of myself. My apartment felt claustrophobic. Every room carried too much silence. Too many unfinished thoughts. So naturally, instead of processing my feelings like a stable adult, I went for a drive. Again. At least this time there wasn't rain. The city blurred quietly outside the windows while music played low through the speakers. Not sad music, technically. Still emotionally suspicious, though. I ended up downtown without really deciding to. Bad sign. Because downtown meant memories. Logan and I used to spend entire weekends there. Coffee shops. Bookstores. Late night walks when neither of us wanted to go home yet. I stopped at a red light near the river and immediately recognized the intersection. My stomach dropped. Sawyer's patrol car sat across the street. Of course it did. For one irrational second, I considered turning immediately. Too late. His headlights flashed once. Great. I pulled into an empty parking area near the water a minute later while Sawyer parked beside me. A second after that, he stepped out of the patrol vehicle and walked toward my car. No lights this time. No authority. Just Sawyer. I rolled down the window slowly. You know, he said casually, most people don't repeatedly get emotionally pulled over by the same cop. I laughed despite myself. There's probably a law against it. Probably. But his expression softened immediately after that. You okay? There it was again. That impossible sincerity. And suddenly I was exhausted all over again. No, I admitted quietly. Sawyer nodded once like he expected that answer. Then he glanced toward the passenger side of my car. Move. I blinked. Excuse me? Move over. I stared at him for a second before obeying automatically. Sawyer climbed into the passenger seat a moment later, shutting the door behind him. And somehow that small enclosed space suddenly felt way too intimate. The river shimmered darkly outside the windshield. Neither of us spoke immediately. Then Sawyer leaned his head back against the seat and sighed softly. You're really good at disappearing when things get hard. I groaned immediately. Can you stop being emotionally correct all the time? No. That's deeply irritating. A small smile tugged briefly at his mouth. Then it faded again. You scared? He asked quietly. The honest answer? Terrified. Of hurting Logan again. Of hurting Sawyer. Of choosing wrong. Of wanting both comfort and change at the same time. I think I'm becoming someone I don't recognize, I admitted softly. Sawyer turned slightly toward me. That's not always a bad thing. I shook my head slowly. You don't understand. Then explain it to me. God. That voice again. Calm enough to make honesty feel possible. I stared out toward the water. When Logan and I broke up, I said quietly, I thought loving someone that deeply was the scariest thing that could happen to me. Sawyer stayed silent. But then I met you. The air shifted immediately. Heavy now. Real. Sawyer didn't move. Neither did I. I wasn't looking for this, I whispered. I know. I still love him. Another pause. I know that too. Hearing him say it out loud hurt more than I expected. Because it made this real in a way I could no longer avoid. Sawyer looked down briefly at his hands before speaking again. You know what's unfair? He asked softly. What? I think if we'd met 6 months from now, maybe this would have been easy. My chest tightened painfully. Because I'd thought the exact same thing. The silence inside the car became almost unbearable. Then Sawyer laughed once under his breath. Look at us, he muttered. Two emotionally unavailable idiots accidentally finding each other at the worst possible time. I smiled weakly. Pretty much. He turned toward me then fully for the first time since getting into the car. Close. Too close. You want to know the really dangerous part? He asked quietly. I swallowed hard. What? I still don't regret meeting you. That almost broke me. Because despite everything, neither did I. The city lights reflected softly across Sawyer's face while he looked at me like he was trying very hard not to cross a line. And suddenly I understood something terrifying. This thing between us wasn't built on fantasy. It was built on recognition. He saw the damaged parts of me clearly. I saw the loneliness in him too. And somehow neither one of us looked away. Sawyer exhaled softly and glanced down toward the center console between us. Then quietly, "You know what I think you need?" "What?" "To stop talking to me for a little while." That hit like ice water. I stared at him. "What?" "You heard me." "No, I did. I just hate it." A sad smile crossed his face briefly. "Yeah," he admitted. "Me too." I shook my head immediately. "Sawyer, you're trying to heal one heartbreak while standing halfway inside another," he said gently. "That's not fair to you. Or Logan. Or me." Every word landed exactly where it hurt. Because he was right again. God, I hated when he was right. "I don't want to lose this," I admitted quietly. Sawyer's expression softened immediately. "You're not losing it. Feels like it." He looked at me for a long moment before answering. "Ethan, if something's real, giving it space won't destroy it." My throat tightened unexpectedly. Outside the windshield, the river moved dark and endless beneath city lights. Inside the car, everything felt painfully still. Then Sawyer reached over slowly and touched my hand. Just once. Gentle. Brief. But enough to send warmth straight through my chest. "You need to figure out whether you're holding on to Logan because you still belong together," he said softly, "or because letting go feels like failing." I shut my eyes hard. Because I didn't know. And maybe that was the problem all along. I didn't call Sawyer after that night by the river. And he didn't call me either. At first, the silence felt unbearable. Then it just felt honest. For 2 weeks, I lived inside my own head more than I wanted to. Work. Sleep. Coffee. Long walks with no destination. I kept reaching for my phone automatically whenever something happened worth sharing. A stupid joke. A rough day. A song Sawyer would have made fun of. Every time, I stopped myself. Because he was right. I needed to figure out whether I was grieving Logan. Or still choosing him. And those weren't the same thing. The hardest part was realizing how much fear had shaped my life without me noticing. I'd spent years leaving emotionally before anyone else could leave first. Pulling away the second love became uncertain. Treating vulnerability like something survivable only in small doses. Logan wasn't perfect. Neither was I. But somewhere along the way, we stopped being honest about what we needed because we were too busy trying not to hurt each other. And ironically, that's exactly what destroyed us. One Sunday afternoon, I found myself standing outside Logan's apartment building again. No rain this time. No excuses either. Just me. My heart pounded so hard walking up those stairs I almost turned around twice. Apartment 4B. Same ugly lamp glowing faintly through the window. I laughed softly under my breath when I saw it. Of course he kept it. For a long moment, I just stood there staring at the door. Then finally knocked. Footsteps approached almost immediately. And suddenly I realized something terrifying. I had no idea what happened next. The door opened. Logan froze. For one suspended second neither of us spoke. God. He looked the same. Maybe a little more tired around the eyes. Hair slightly longer. Gray sweatshirt sleeves pushed up his forearms exactly the way I remembered. But still Logan. Still the person my chest recognized before my brain could catch up. "Ethan," he said quietly. And just hearing my name in his voice again nearly unraveled me completely. "Hey." His eyes searched my face carefully, like he was trying to figure out whether this was real. Then softly, "Are you okay?" Same Logan. Always that first. I laughed weakly. "You always ask that immediately. You usually need someone to." "Fair." He stepped aside automatically. "Come in." Walking back into that apartment felt surreal. Nothing had changed. Same book stacked unevenly on the coffee table. Same blanket tossed over the couch. Same faint scent of coffee and detergent and home. My chest ached instantly. Logan stayed near the kitchen while I stood awkwardly in the living room like a stranger visiting my own memories. Neither of us knew how to start. Finally, I spoke first. "I'm sorry." Logan shut his eyes briefly. "Ethan." "No," I interrupted softly. "I need to say this correctly." My throat tightened. I spent months blaming the breakup on timing, stress, fighting. But the truth is, I swallowed hard. I got scared. Logan stayed completely still. "I loved you so much that every argument started feeling catastrophic," I admitted quietly. "And instead of trusting us to survive hard things, I ran before you could decide I wasn't worth the effort anymore." Silence filled the apartment. Heavy. Painfully honest. Logan looked down briefly before meeting my eyes again. "You really thought I was going to leave you?" The sadness in his voice almost destroyed me. "I don't know," I whispered. "Maybe I thought everyone eventually would." Logan crossed the room slowly then. Close enough now that I could see the exhaustion in his face too. "You know what hurt the most?" he asked softly. I shook my head. "That you decided what I felt for me." My chest tightened sharply. "Because he was right." "I know," I whispered. Logan exhaled slowly. "You kept acting like loving you was some burden I was eventually gonna get tired of carrying." His voice cracked slightly. "And Ethan, I chose you every single day." Tears burned instantly behind my eyes. Because I knew he had. Even at the end. Even exhausted. "I loved you badly," I admitted. "No," Logan said quietly. "You loved me scared." That sentence settled deep inside me. Not absolution. Just truth. For a long moment we stood there in silence. Then Logan asked softly, "Why now?" And there it was. The question I'd been asking myself for weeks. Why now? Because of Sawyer? Because I was lonely? Because I missed safety? I thought about diner coffee at 3 a.m. About a police officer with tired eyes who saw through me too easily. About being told hard truths gently. About realizing I was capable of becoming someone more honest than the version of myself that left this apartment 4 months ago. Sawyer mattered. Deeply. But standing there looking at Logan now, I finally understood something clearly. What I felt for Sawyer was possibility. What I felt for Logan was unfinished. And those weren't the same thing. "I think," I said slowly, "meeting someone else made me realize I never actually dealt with losing you." Logan absorbed that quietly. "You seeing someone?" I hesitated. Then honestly, "No. But there's someone I care about." That hurt him. I saw it immediately. But he nodded anyway because Logan had always valued honesty even when it bruised him. "And you're here," he said carefully. "Yes." The room went very quiet. Then Logan laughed softly under his breath. "You know," he murmured, "part of me wanted to hate you when you left. I would have deserved it. Probably." That earned the smallest smile from both of us. Then it faded again. "I don't know what happens now," Logan admitted quietly. "Me either." Another silence stretched between us. And then, finally, Logan stepped closer and wrapped his arms around me. Just a hug. Simple. Familiar. But the second I held him again, something inside me settled in a way it hadn't for months. Not fixed. Not perfect. Just real. Logan pulled back slightly after a long moment, eyes searching mine carefully. "You staying tonight?" he asked softly. And for the first time in a very long time, running didn't feel like the answer anymore.